Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen.
And I'm Tana Amen. Here we teach you how to win the fight for your brain to defeat anxiety, depression, memory loss, ADHD, and addictions.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by Amen Clinics, where we've transformed lives for 3 decades using brain SPECT imaging to better target treatment and natural ways to heal the brain. For more information, visit amenclinics.com.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is also brought to you by BrainMD, where we produce the highest quality nutraceutical products to support the health of your brain and body. For more information, visit brainmdhealth.com. Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. And stay tuned for a special code for a discount to Amen Clinics for a full evaluation, as well as any of our supplements at brainmdhealth.com.
Well, welcome everybody. We are so excited about the next 3 podcasts we're going to do together with our friend Max Lugavere, who's the author of the brand new best-selling book, Genius Foods: Become Smarter, Happier, and More Productive While Protecting Your Brain for Life. And I know how important this book is to Max. Max and I first met on the Dr. Oz show. We were studying the effects of technology and the brain, on the brain, and Max was one of our subjects. But when I heard his story about why health was important to him, I just bonded to him immediately, and I'm just so grateful that he's going to take time for us. He's been interviewed and contributed to Medscape, Vice, Fast Company, The Daily Beast. He's been featured on NBC Nightly News, The Dr. Oz Show multiple times, The Wall Street Journal. He is a journalist and has a personal interest. So welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I definitely consider myself a brain warrior, so this is a real honor.
So brain warriors are armed, prepared, and aware.
Yes,
so,
it's a war.
So why did you become a brain warrior?
I became a brain warrior because about 7 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative condition. I had no prior family history of any kind of dementia. And at the youthful age of 58, my mom, spirited, blonde-haired, began showing her very first symptoms, ending up with me going around the country with my mom to some of the top neurology departments in the United States to try to come to some sort of consensus as to what it was that she had. She had symptoms that were indicative of a movement disorder, but then it seemed, her cognition also had downshifted pretty profoundly. I mean, I think when we're talking to an elderly person, we all, speak a little bit more slowly because we understand that there's a decline in processing speed that occurs with age. But my mom was not old, so it had seemed suddenly as if my mom had had a brain transplant with an elderly person. And, I now know that dementia is not a natural aspect of aging. But back then I was just completely ignorant. And when my mom was first diagnosed at the Cleveland Clinic, I became obsessed with learning everything I possibly could about how diet and lifestyle might provide a more meaningful intervention for my mom, while also becoming really interested, in fact, laser focused on the steps that we can take today to prevent cognitive decline from ever happening to us when we're young. One of the most shocking things that I learned, which Dr. Amen, you preach all the time, is that dementia is not something that bubbles up overnight. It's often a decades-long disease process, and it became very much my passion and mission to spread the message of prevention and awareness to younger people. And so that's really what led to the creation of Genius Foods.
Max, you said your mom was showing symptoms of a movement disorder as well. So that's very interesting. So she was really suffering significantly for someone so young.
There was a change to her gait. Her stride was affected. She, had been previously a normal, way in which she walked became suddenly a shuffle. So there were symptoms that were indicative of something Parkinsonian.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
On.
Yeah.
But there was no tremor.
Okay.
And the ultimate diagnosis for her was what?
So it seems that she has something like Lewy body dementia, is
Okay.
what it has, basically unfolded as. Um, and her course has been somewhat stable, for better or worse. Lewy body dementia is a very niche form of dementia. There's not a lot known about it. It affects about 1 million people in the United States.
So Lewy body is the dementia that Robin Williams died from. It is where you get this deposition of these things called alpha synuclein plaques that attack the basal ganglia, also attack the occipital lobes. So on SPEC, the study we do, you can differentiate this from Alzheimer's disease, which is usually the parietal and temporal lobes. Lewy body dementia is usually the basal ganglia and the occipital lobes in the back. And all the steps to keep your brain healthy or reverse Alzheimer's are the same steps for Lewy body as well, which may in some ways, at least in my experience, be associated with toxic exposure. And toxins are just everywhere, including our food. So tell us about Genius Foods. We have young people who listen to the podcast, old people, but all of us want to be a genius no matter what our age. So talk to us about what you wrote about in Genius Foods.
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting time where, most people that are clued into health-related content are aware that sugar's not good, right? And I can go on, and as can you, about the dangers of added sugar and how our food supply has just become saturated in it. But in Genius Foods, rather than continue to beat people over the head with what they shouldn't be eating, I decided to go another route, food body of evidence that foods actually improve your brain functions and support your brain health in a way that's going to help minimize your risk decades from now for the kinds of diseases that we are talking about. A really interesting study came out from the University of Texas that found that dietary diversity in the modern supermarket is actually not a good thing. So when people abide by the eat everything in moderation rule, they tend to use that as an excuse or justification to eat more junk food. Whereas the healthiest people buy healthy foods on loop. And so with Genius Foods, that was sort of like my strategy where I said, okay, these are the 10 foods and food categories that if you were just to put on your smartphone and just remind yourself every time you go to the supermarket to buy these foods on loop, you're probably going to lose a lot of weight and your brain is going to thank you for it. We go into depth on foods to avoid, certainly processed food, and especially ream the industrial processed oils that now saturate our food supply. Canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, and these are toxic foods to the brain. But I really try to, in Genius Foods, make all of my recommendations highly actionable and talk in terms of food. I think a lot of nutrition scientists suffer from what Michael Pollan calls nutritionism. We basically, break down foods into their nutrients, but we didn't co-evolve with single nutrients. We co-evolved with food. And food is what we buy when we go to the supermarket. So it's a very food-focused approach.
And I like that because people get lost in the minutia and then they finish your book and they're like, that was really good. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I still don't know what to eat. So they get really confused. I mean, I see it all the time. People will reach out all the time. They're like, I don't know what to eat. So that's why when you make it simple like that, they need to know what foods to eat. Then if you want to tell them what's in the foods, that's fine. But they need to know what food to eat first.
So in the last 24 hours, I'm just looking at the foods on the cover of Genius Foods. I've actually had all of them. I had eggs this morning. We had a salad and salmon last night.
Yeah.
I have a cup of frozen blueberries.
Almost every day.
Every day. I had nuts for lunch. We actually, BrainMD, which is our supplement food company, makes a sugar-free, dairy-free dark chocolate. So I love this. This is exactly how we eat.
Well, I was thinking as Max was talking that the people who are the healthiest are the ones who eat the same foods, but they're the healthy food. I'm like, well, no wonder you're so healthy because you can eat the same stuff.
Well, and people are already in a rhythm or in a rut. It's just, are you in a rut or are you in a a supercharged tunnel
Right.
to get what you want.
Are you on a
It's like
cul-de-sac
people
or
go,
are you on a
oh,
highway?
this is hard. It's like, well, your routine is going to make you sick and you're going to die early. Why don't you just get another different routine
right.
with foods that serve your health rather than foods that steal your health?
Right. I agree. Both of you said something, and maybe this is a whole podcast in and of itself, but we talk a lot about toxins, and we mentioned this here about how toxins can be one of those things that make people sick. But there's a lot of power in food, antioxidant foods that help with detoxifying the body. So do you talk about that at all, Max, about how, especially in light of what's going on with your mom, can you talk about a little bit about your recommendations for what you put in the book for detoxifying foods?
Absolutely. I definitely talk about the value of antioxidants in food, particularly the fat-soluble variety, vitamin E. We want to seek out these fat-soluble antioxidants in our foods, but some of the most valuable foods are valuable in part because they stimulate our body's own antioxidant production. Right. So I talk a lot about these in the book, the value of cruciferous vegetables, things like that. We live in a time where, detox programs are very trendy. But people forget that we have the ultimate detox machine right in our own bodies, and that's our livers. We just need to feed the right ingredients, eat the right ingredients so that our livers have the materials to produce these detox compounds and get the stimulus required to sort of kick us.
Yeah, I had a patient one time get really upset with me because when I was talking about detoxifying foods, like eating healthy to support the liver. And she was like, well, I shouldn't have to do all of that. And environmental toxins, so what? That's what my liver is for. And like all these foods, that's so what if I eat bad and drink alcohol? That's what my liver is for. And I'm like, yes, but there is a thing, there is cirrhosis, there's all sorts of problems if you don't support your liver with healthy foods. If you don't take care of it, it can't take care of you. So there's a way to eat foods to support it, and there's a way to not do that. So clearly.
Absolutely. Containing foods with sulfur-containing amino acids, eggs, grass-fed beef, broccoli, things like that, very important stuff. Even whey protein could, potentially be used. But then also you really want to eat the foods that stimulate those gene pathways involved in creating those liver detox compounds. So I talk a lot about actually my favorite for broccoli. So broccoli is a very potent activator of these detox pathways in the body, 100 times as powerful as adult broccoli. So that's why whenever I go to the supermarket, I'm always looking out for broccoli sprouts. And I even grow my own, actually. On my website, there's a great guide. You can super cheaply grow your own broccoli sprouts after 3 days. And they're one of those powerful foods that you can eat.
That's fantastic.
So stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about foods and tactics that can supercharge and rejuvenate your brain, no matter what your age.
Welcome back. We are still here with Max Lugavere, and we're talking about genius foods. It's a great topic. And we have lots of questions for you, Max, but let's jump in and continue on with genius foods.
Well, one question I have is we were talking about detox, and a lot of people don't get it's not just your liver.
Right.
That detoxes you. It's your liver, so you should eat more brassicas.
Right.
So as we were talking about broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, your gut is a huge detoxification organ. And so more fiber, which those brassicas happen to have, right? But also your kidneys, so drink more water. And your skin, before I came today, I actually spent 25 minutes in the sauna just to get a good sweat going.
Right. And
those heat shock proteins have actually been shown to be an antidepressant. So I'm super happy today that we get to talk to Max. So Max, let's talk about this idea of food is medicine or poison.
Yeah, I love that. I love that line from you. Actually, you said that on the Dr. Oz show that we were both featured on together, which I love. You know, with every bite you take, your cognitive health is a choice that you're making.
Yes.
And yeah, you know, I mean, when it comes to gut health, there was a very interesting study that was published recently from Rush University that found that people that consumed a large bowl of dark leafy greens every single day had brains that looked 11 years younger on scans. And this was an observation that was made in this study, but it's fun to speculate what the mechanism may be, you know. And when you think about dark leafy greens, you know, they're packed with fiber, as you mentioned. They help move things through the gut, but they also provide food for the 30 trillion microbes that live in our large intestine. So the gut brain axis is a really exciting area of research. I go into depth in it, or on it, I should say, in my book Genius Foods. But it really plays a major role. In fact, many of the diseases that we were talking about on the last podcast, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease, it's unclear what the inciting incident is for either of these two diseases, but it's becoming increasingly clear that what really kicks the cascade into motion for these two diseases may begin in the gut. So I think when it comes to eating foods that benefit the gut, it's dark leafy greens, it's fibrous vegetables, it's colorful, low sugar fruits, things like that. These are all beneficial, and even probiotic containing foods.
Right.
If you don't like them, I mean, going for a probiotic might be beneficial. Very early days for this kind of research, just to be clear, but there was another very compelling study that came out of Iran about a year and a half ago that found that a probiotic actually was able to significantly improve symptoms for patients with pretty severe cognitive impairment in the form of Alzheimer's disease. So obviously needs to be replicated, but I'm very optimistic that the gut is going to be, increasingly a focal point for researchers looking to solve these diseases.
Yeah, no question. We had David Perlmutter on, and he's the author of Brainmaker, which is just a marvelous book. And, Tana's a nurse, and I often say, so why do nurses put alcohol on your skin before they give you a shot? And it's to kill the bugs. But what about all the alcohol people drink that are killing the bugs in your gut? I think we just have to be so careful. When our daughter was 6, Tana taught her about the microbiome, and Chloe got all weirded out.
I told her she had bugs in her gut, and she freaked out. I'm like, no, they're like pets. You have to take care of them because these pets take care of you back. so she named them.
So loving them, feeding them. And one really interesting thing, as a psychiatrist, I realized that early childhood stress actually changes the microbiome in a very negative way. And it sets people up to be anxious, perhaps for the rest of their lives, unless you go back and fix their gut.
Well, so many kids are on chronic antibiotics. And that, you just led me into one of my questions. So I deal with a lot of moms in my community. And, nutrition is something I've been fascinated with for a long time, mostly to heal myself in the past. And then now I planted it in our clinics for brain health. But one of the things that people constantly say to me is, well, how should I feed my child? I'm doing your program. How should I feed my child? And that's always an interesting question, because there's not like a special diet that kids should be on once they're not eating baby food anymore. And even then, it should be really healthy food like you eat. But with the exception of, there are always some foods. Of course, babies should not eat peanut butter until they don't have a peanut allergy past a certain age, and honey because of botulism. And I mean, there's certain foods specifically, raw honey. And there are specific foods based on allergies. But these programs, your program, Max, is perfect for kids. And yes, I get it. Some kids aren't going to eat all those greens initially. But you can boost the antioxidants in their diet until they get used to greens with spices and herbs and things like this.
And you can hide them like you did.
Hide them in smoothies. You are the biggest kid in our house. I had to hide them from you, mostly. So I had to stick them in smoothies. I put them in smoothies to hide the flavor.
I know. I saw her put a whole handful of kale in a smoothie
spinach
one day, and I'm like, I'm not eating that. I'm not a cow. And she said, well, you've been eating this for
2 months.
2 months. She's sneaky, Max. She is a sneaky woman. Pretty.
Well,
but do you have any other comments about kids?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the value of another nutrient that's become relatively demonized over the past couple of decades comes into play and actually proves pretty useful, and that is sodium in the form of salt. Who said that vegetables need to taste bland and or bad? Roasting vegetables with garlic and salt and pepper, you can make them incredibly savory and tasty. And actually, salt is incredibly important because sodium, again, is a nutrient. It's required to get vitamin C into the brain, which helps create neurotransmitters. People that are on low-carb diets that do things that cause the excretion of sodium, whether it's drinking coffee or exercising vigorously, which we know that we should, or even taking certain diuretic drugs, need to replenish sodium. So for children that are growing, I think, making sure that the vegetables taste good, using salt to do that, I think is profoundly important. In my book, I also talk about research performed in Kenya by Charlotte Newman at UCLA, who found that children that were supplemented with beef, grass-fed beef, actually showed an improvement in mental health and learning abilities compared to dairy and compared to just a vegan meal. And this is one of the, I think, really important bits of research. It was a trial that can show us the value of properly raised meat, especially for the developing brain.
So why does red meat have a bad rap?
I think it's because most of the people, increasingly throughout the world, but especially here in the United States, eat pretty miserable quality red meat. And they also tend to eat meat in the context of diets that we know are really bad. 60% of the calories that we consume today come from what are called ultra-processed foods.
Right.
You throw really unhealthy, factory-raised meat on top of that. That is not a recipe for health. So whereas typically produced grain-fed beef, I would say, is anything but a health food, grass-fed and particularly organic, but really I think grass-fed is the key term here. 100% grass-fed really makes red meat a health food, and so I think that's really, really important. And while nutrition for the developing brain, especially for neonates, is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, we now know that we continue to grow new brain cells up until death. And so by providing our bodies with the proper building blocks to do that, DHA fat, vitamin B12, all the nutrients that are found in properly produced whole foods, I think becomes critical, and particularly at younger ages.
So I agree with everything you said. If I could just throw in a couple little tricks that I used with my daughter and my big kid, the other big kid in my house, that wears the wedding ring that matches mine. So what I used to do is I would blend up vegetables and put them in like a chili, or I would blend up vegetables and instead of using breadcrumbs, put them in beef patties. And I love everything else you said. I actually did a segment on sodium as well. I agree with you on what you said. And also adding cinnamon or vanilla is amazing. It makes them taste great. So you can get your kids to eat some veggies. It might take a little time. Be patient. So I just want to throw that in.
Well, and my grandson, our grandson, who wouldn't eat at all when he was a baby, he was just a super picky eater, and you were playing with avocado gelato at the time. And we have this great picture, Max, of Eli with chocolate all over his face.
It's actually avocado with raw cacao in it. It's, basically pretty simple.
Right. So a developing brain requires nutrients in order to stay healthy.
But these are all the same foods that you've been talking about. I'm just sneaky about getting kids to eat them.
Well, look, I mean, I'm a big kid, right? Like, I want to eat foods that taste good.
Yes,
and
men are big kids. Yes.
Yeah, and so And so actually, I'm pretty proud of the recipes in my book. I've got turmeric encrusted chicken fingers. I've
Oh,
got
that sounds
chicken wings.
good.
Yeah, and I also have a kale salad that's made using nutritional yeast,
Oh,
which is one
yum.
of my favorite foods.
Yeah, it
It's
tastes
savory.
cheesy. Yeah.
It tastes cheesy. Yeah, kids love it, and it's full of vitamins.
That sounds great. I should try that.
Well, we're going to talk, when we come back, we're going to talk about more practical tips on how you can use food as medicine to optimize your mind now and later.
I'm going to pick that up. Those recipes sound amazing.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
going to trick you more.
Stay with us. Welcome back. We are here with Max Lugavere, author of best-selling book, Genius Foods. We're having a really great time. Let's make this last podcast as practical as possible. People think getting healthy is hard. And our response usually is being sick is hard. This is easy. You just have to put the right strategies in your life. So talk to us about that.
I have one question first, because this is really important. How many recipes are in your book? When you mentioned you had turmeric chicken fingers, I was like, oh, that sounds yummy. How many recipes do you have?
I have about 15 recipes in my book.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, and those turmeric encrusted chicken fingers can be turned into chicken nuggets. But actually, and this is not something I've talked about on any other podcast, but the reason why I call the chicken fingers is because they're named in honor of the finger study that was performed out of the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, which is the world's first ever large population, long-term randomized controlled trial to show us that cognitive decline does not have to be a necessary aspect of aging. So that's the name of the trial, the finger trial. And so I've named these turmeric encrusted chicken fingers after the trial.
I like
That's hysterical. Yeah. So this trial basically used three big strategies. So diet, much like how Max talks about in Genius Foods, exercise, including weight-bearing exercises, and new learning. Mm-hmm. So there was a cognitive enhancement, so working your brain like a muscle. They took people who had cognitive impairment. So these were not normal people. They weren't at the end stages of Alzheimer's, obviously, but they were people who were beginning the dark road. And they showed it was a 2-year trial, I believe, a 30% improvement in their memory compared to the control group that did nothing but continue to get worse with treatment as usual. So it's huge. All of the pharmaceutical companies that were heavily invested in Alzheimer's disease, they started shutting down these divisions and laid off thousands of people because you will never find one medicine to prevent Alzheimer's disease or treat it, because it's not a single mechanism disease. It is a multifactorial disease, what you and I always talk about. You have to fight the war on multiple fronts, and food totally does that.
Right. Reminds me of Vikings. One of my favorite episodes of Vikings, when they were really sneaky and they surrounded them from every side. That's what you got to do.
And that's what you can do with the food. So Max, let's talk about, in your mind, in Genius Foods and your experience, what are 5 or 6 of the most practical things people can do to use food as medicine?
Absolutely. So the first trick that I would say everybody should really go out of their way to eat what I call huge fatty salad every single day. This includes dark leafy greens like kale, spinach, and arugula. This, as I mentioned in the first podcast, has been shown actually to be a strategy that's associated with reduced brain aging by up to 11 years, thanks to this wonderful Rush University study led by Martha Claire Morris. So huge fatty salad, douse it with extra virgin olive oil, which leads me to my second tip, which would be to clear your kitchen of grain and seed oils like canola oil, corn oil, and soybean oil, and stock up on high-quality extra virgin olive oil, which is the only fat which has a robust body of evidence behind it to say that this oil can actually improve cognitive function and perhaps shield you against these kinds of diseases in the long term. The third thing that I would say is critically important is to shop on the perimeter in your supermarket. So the aisles are usually where these processed foods, which now make up 60% of our calories, lie in wait. But being cognizant of these kinds of foods and knowing how to shop around them not only reduces temptation and the necessity to use your willpower, which is, only so strong, but really the perimeter is where you're going to find all these exact foods that we're talking about as being very beneficial to the brain. The fourth step I would say, the fourth tip I would give people is one that I think your listeners are really going to appreciate, and that is to eat dark chocolate.
Yes.
Habitual dark chocolate consumers have better, stronger memories. Cocoflavanols seem to reverse almost aging of the hippocampus, which is the vulnerable memory center in the brain, the first structure to really be affected by Alzheimer's disease. And so for chocolate, I recommend that people go for 85% cacao or higher, but eat a bar a week. It's one of my go-to snacks. And, you really can't go wrong with dark chocolate, especially
but let's talk about sugar and dairy. And, so many people just heard you say a Snickers a day keeps the doctor away.
Even though you didn't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is so important. And when you get to 85%, it actually is pretty bitter. We make two things, one called Brain and Love, the other one called Brain on Joy, which is chocolate and coconut. But we sweeten it with erythritol and stevia, and it tastes actually awesome. I'm so proud of it. But a lot of times people hear chocolate, and then they're dipping strawberries into Ghirardelli chocolate, which may not be the right strategy.
Right. So I was thinking, though, because I love what you just said, as did 99% of the women who listen to our show. I was thinking, because you say I never forget any bad thing you've ever done.
Ever.
It's because of the chocolate. I just figured it out.
It's it's brain food. What can I say? By the way, it's so cute watching you guys. Vander, this is one of my favorite podcasts I've ever been on because you guys are just like amazing together.
We're a little crazy, but at least I married a psychiatrist, so
to take care of your craziness.
Got to tell you, it's awesome.
All right, so we have salad, and I missed the word. It was a big fatty salad.
A big
huge
fat salad.
A big fat salad that actually has fat in it, which is get your oils right. And virgin olive oil does have a lot of wonderful research. Shop on the outside of the store, because when you go down the aisles, and my dad owns a chain of grocery stores, I grew up in them. Tana and I actually did a video with Mark Hyman on shopping in a food desert. And if you look at corn dogs, for example, they have 29 ingredients in them, and most of them you actually wouldn't recognize as food. Mm-hmm. And then dark chocolate, but you have to be careful. If you're going to, be careful, get rid of the dairy. And my problem with dairy is the hormones and antibiotics that are in it, and that so many people are sensitive to it. And you're kicking me under the table.
Because
Why?
I want to make sure that before we go, I just want to give people one little tip that I figured out for traveling, because they always ask. And maybe, Max, you already have this in your book. I don't know. But one thing that I figured out, because I can't have vinegar. And so sometimes vinegar and oil when you're traveling or whatever is just too hard for people and they don't like it. So if you do the olive oil, which is perfect, like you said, it's really good for you. And sometimes even lemon's a little too bitter. Ask them for a couple of orange slices and just squirt the orange over the top of the salad. It's amazing.
It's so good.
And it's so simple.
It has no calories. And, I don't know. My friend Mark Hyman and I fight about this all the time. He's like, oh, calories don't matter. And I'm like, you've been smoking way too much pot. It's like...
He does not smoke pot. Wait, back up. He does not smoke pot. You cannot go on. People listen to you. He does not smoke pot. Our friend Mark Hyman does smoke pot. No, he does not smoke pot.
I didn't say he did.
Yeah,
I'm just saying anybody who says it doesn't matter.
get back to Max.
I would agree with that statement, actually, that calories still do matter, but I think
the quality
key
matters
is really,
more.
Quality matters, and when you're eating foods that are of higher quality and that are not ultra processed, it becomes a lot easier to eat a responsible amount of calories.
Well, and you get to eat more of them.
And your appetite tends to get better. Your cravings tend to get better when you kill the sugar. But if you're having 800 calories of nuts a day, you're going to gain weight.
Not if you're just having 800 calories of nuts, but if you have just 800 calories of Twinkies, you will get inflamed and gain weight over time.
But initially, you will lose weight.
And then you will gain weight.
That's true.
Because you're going to mess up your leptin.
One more. Max, one more tip.
Sorry, Max.
I love this.
We should have warned you. So do you have one more tip for us?
Yes. So, all right, let me think about this. Well, I guess, my last tip would be to really write these dietary changes into your identity, to make them a part of who you are. I think it becomes a lot easier to skip the self-negotiation.
I agree.
When you really make this embedded into your being. And, you guys have brain warriors. That's very much a badge of honor that I think people wear, and it's an identity. But there's this funny joke that people that are into CrossFit, vegans, people that are paleo, within 5 minutes of meeting them, that they adhere to this diet because those are very much identities.
Right.
So I think that by embedding these kinds of rules into your own personal constitution, I think it becomes a lot easier to stick to them. You're a person that perhaps only eats red meat if it's grass-fed, or you're a person that's only going to use extra virgin olive oil. You're not going to use commercial salad dressings ever. Those are kinds of those are the rules that I think by embedding them into your health, into your sort of core constitution, they're really going to help you stick to them and skip that self-negotiation, which I think becomes really difficult, especially in the modern world.
I agree with you so much. In fact, that's one of the reasons we started the whole brain warrior concept. So I practice martial arts. Daniel was in the Army. And I have learned so much from being a quote unquote martial artist. That's part of my identity. So we found that when people take on that identity, there's so much that they, as you said, it becomes part of who they are. When we talked about getting your black belt in health, how would a warrior think? What would a warrior do? What would a black belt do? There are certain things they do. There are certain things they do not do. And it just becomes easier to adhere to that. I agree with you 100%.
Well, you have to be armed, prepared, and aware. And you would probably also
and sometimes you got to fight.
That, the real weapons of mass destruction, I always say ISIS has nothing on our food industry. They're highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber, food-like substances stored in plastic containers that are literally destroying the health of America. And unless you are super clear about the goals you have for your life, you're going to be run over by this food industry that is damaging our society.
But I still believe in the whole David and Goliath thing, so watch out.
What does that mean?
It means they're the Goliath, but that doesn't matter. David won.
So we can win.
We can win.
Those of you that are listening, you can win.
Yep.
Pick up a copy of Genius Foods by Max Lugavere. I have Mark in my head now.
Poor Mark. Poor Mark. Mark is coming on next week. So.
And we love Mark. We love him so much.
Oh, God.
Genius Foods. Thanks, Max. What a joy
Max. That was
to
so
be with
much
you.
fun.
Next time we're going to have you in the studio with us, and you can partake of this craziness.
I can't wait, you guys. I truly can't wait to hang in person. And again, it was an honor to be here with you guys and all of the Brain Warriors. So thanks for having me.
That was fantastic.
All right, my friend. Take care.
You too.
Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.